Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. This is Jim Johnson. I am the project manager and line editor for the Star Trek Adventures RPG and the Captain's Log solo RPG, both published by Modiphius Entertainment. I am back with another video all about Captain's Log, and wanted to throw this video out here. I've had some conversations from folks online on social media talking about Captain's Log, and thought I would take an opportunity here to talk a little bit about Captain's Log and how you can use some Star Trek Adventures products with it if you so choose. In this particular case, one of my commenters on one of the other YouTube, one of my other videos, suggested that I take one of the adventures and see what you can do with it within Captain's Log. So I'm taking Biological Clock by Fred Love, one of my prolific Star Trek Adventures writers, and this adventure is from the first mission compendium that we published back in, gosh, it must have been 2018, called These Are the Voyages. This is mission compendium number 1, These Are the Voyages. It contains 8 different standalone adventures from a variety of eras. Of course, you can always adapt them for use in other eras if you want to. So this is one of the earlier adventures that we published for the game. I had the happy fortune of editing this book. In parallel, we were working on the core rulebook at about the same time. And so this adventure supplement came out shortly after the core rulebook back in 2017, 2018. And I had a lot of fun working with Fred and the other writers on this. So without any more... Well, actually, I will say, first of all, thanks so much to all the subscribers. Thanks to everybody for coming back to the videos and watching. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for all the great comments and questions that you're posting in the comments down below and in all the other videos on my channel. Really appreciate your support. Really appreciate the community that's starting to grow here. So, keep it coming. Keep asking questions. Keep giving me suggestions. Anything I can do to help your Captain's Log experience be better and more exciting and more fun so that you're out there telling great stories. Anything I can do to help, just let me know. The Gen Con was this past weekend. From everything that I'm hearing, informally, I haven't heard any formal reports yet, but informally, it sounds like Captain's Log was a big hit, and I think we may have actually sold out at Gen Con. Not to say the whole book is sold out, but just like the copies that we brought to Gen Con, I think we're sold out. Anyway, so all that being said, hopefully you've got it on PDF or in print. Hopefully you're enjoying it. And so let's go ahead and talk about Biological Clock and how you might adapt this adventure or any of our standalone adventures to being used in Captain's Log. So of course you'll see, as with all of our standalone adventures, we have a 3-act structure, starting with a synopsis, 3 acts, and then a conclusion. The more recent standalone adventures also include a mission brief at the end, and this mission was early enough that we did not think to do that, because at the time I hadn't really formally conceptualized what a mission brief was just yet, at least in terms of Star Trek Adventures, so you won't see that in here. But in my next video, I'm going to be talking about how to adapt a mission brief to Captain's Log and how to make that work for you. So we'll do the full-blown adventure now, and then we'll talk about a mission brief next. So let's just jump right into it, shall we? All right. Oh, and I should have started my stopwatch, because I want to try to keep this down to half an hour, just to get you in and out, nice and easy. All right. So all of our standalone adventures start with a synopsis. It gives you a kind of a high-level overview of what's going to happen in the episode based on what the overall thrust of the story is, and then notionally how you can bring it to a conclusion, depending on what your players do, depending on what kind of creative, collaborative story you end up telling. I think I've run a whole bunch of our standalone adventures for different groups, and I would say every single one of them has ended up very different than they were written, and that's great, because ultimately you should be looking at these standalone adventures as toolkits and not as like a railroad to drive your players on from beginning to end. There should be enough flexibility built into each one of these that your players have a plethora of choices to choose from, and then those choices that they make will shape the progress of the story as they go. So to take this adventure, then you can see we've already got an opening Captain's Log. So just like in Captain's Log, where it encourages you to start rolling on the probability matrices to start gathering details and insights and the inciting incident and what's the first mission and all that important stuff that you need to start building the story. When you come to a standalone adventure, a lot of that heavy lifting or light lifting, depending on how you like to do it, is already done for you to a certain degree, right? Like all the details are here. Like you can read this first captain's log. My first collection run to Optera 4 as commanding officer is now underway. I confess I'm as conflicted as ever, etc., etc., etc. So like all that inciting incident stuff and all those initial rolls that you'll make in captain's log, following the procedural flow charts and guidance in the book. Instead of rolling for all that stuff, a lot of it is already provided to you in the standalone adventure. Now, as you read through it, as you read through the captain's log and you read through the synopsis, you might find places where you want to start adding even more detail, and that's where you can hop into captain's log, grab some of those probability matrices, and just start adding more details. Like if there's a key NPC in here, maybe you want to think about what their motivation is, or what's their perspective on the Federation, or whatever. You can just start annotating more notes onto this if you want to. All of our standalone adventures, most of them anyway, come in a printer-friendly version on a white background. So if you wanted to print it off and jot down notes in the margins, you could do that. If you want to annotate the PDF, of course, you can do that too. So lots of options there to play with. But anyway, so the standalone adventure here, like it's setting up. It gives you the opening log and it gives you a synopsis so that you have a sense of what's coming. And then even every standalone adventure also has a directive. We didn't focus on directives too much in Captain's Log, but that is an option for you to play with, where if in addition to your character's values, you want to add some directives for the mission, like this mission you are expected to do X, Y, and Z, you can add that directive as a kind of an optional value that you can challenge or follow as needed. And of course, the prime directive is always present. Prime directive is the key focus thing. There's information in Captain's Log about the prime directive. You can also hit the internet, search on prime directive Star Trek. I'm sure you'll find plenty of hits, plenty of insights and information out there about what the prime directive is and how it works. And barring that, watch the show. Picard, Janeway, Kirk, all the captains hit the prime directive at one point or another, some more than others. And so you can get a lot of perspectives on that. So anyway, just on this one page, just on this summary page, this synopsis page, you've got the opening credit, you've got the opening captain's log, you've got a synopsis of the entire adventure, and you've got a directive that you can play with. So that's all great story grist for you to drop into your captain's log draft and start building upon it, right? And now, again, I'm not going to spoil this. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail about how to use each individual piece of this. But you can see there's some guidance here on how to adapt it for other eras of play. So if you're playing Captain's Log and you are, this adventure was written for Next Generation, but if you're doing an Enterprise era series or an original series, or even Discovery, etc., there's some guidance in here on how to adapt it. Then you can use that as just ideas. Heading into Act 1, you can see there's another Captain's Log here, so you can use that if you want to. Scene 1 opens up right away. Anomalous sensor readings. Well, that's a great way to start a story, right? You got your activity, the reading or paraphrasing information. This is all great setup material right here. You could probably cut and paste this and drop it right into your Captain's Log. Now, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that, especially if you're planning on sharing it with other people to enjoy and read, only because copyright infringement's a thing, right? So I would probably encourage you to take any of this dialogue here and maybe revise it into your character's own particular voice and speech patterns and mannerisms, etc. But if you're just doing it for yourself and you're not planning on sharing it with anybody, cut and paste, or just pull whatever you need out of here, and use it for your purposes. Have fun with it. Then you got there's some questions in here. The player characters may have questions about the nature of the tetragons. Con or science officers should be allowed to conduct a more in-depth sensor scan. So, I mean, right here, Act 1, Scene 1, you got some tasks you can be attempting. You can try to create an advantage. You can try to get some other stuff done here. So this is a little bit more procedural and step-by-steppy than necessarily going into Captain's Log and just rolling on tables and starting to form that story as you go. The story's already kind of formed here, and what you're doing is you're adding your character into it, their choices, their actions, and then you're getting the information delivered to you. I mean, you can even follow, like, player characters may make a precise sensor sweep of the tetragons with a reason plus science task. assisted by the ship. Now, of course, assists in Captain's Log don't exist, but you could have you could have your character roll for this task, or you could just have the ship roll for the task, right? It's up to you. Or if you've gone to the extra level, if you feel really so inclined, you could make character sheets for your key non-player characters, right? And have them roll. If you want, by all means, go ahead. And then you can say, okay, well, I was successful. I can learn some of this information. Or maybe you weren't successful and you don't learn this information. And then you need to shape the story from there. Or maybe you decide to succeed at a cost and just make it happen. Although actually, now that I think about it, I don't think we have succeeded at a cost in Captain's Log. I honestly don't remember, and I apologize because I probably should remember, but I'll have to go back and double check. But that is one of the rules in Star Trek Adventures, that if it did make it into Captain's Log, it would be very easy to port into Captain's Log without really any difficulty, because what you're doing is you're just deciding, oh, you know what, I did succeed, but I'm going to take a complication to make my life more interesting. So it's technically a fail, but you're the producer, you're the writer, you can clean it up in post and make it work. So anyway, so there's stuff in here that you can play with. Of course, we've got some great art in here. All the standalone adventures, at least in the books, we did have the budget to commission some art. The standalone adventures in PDF format only. They are run on a pretty lean and mean schedule, so we reuse art in those as often as possible. So if art matters to you, there's art in here that you can use. So again, just working through the first scene. There's some great stuff in here. Scene 2, scene 2 is like the natural progression, right? Assuming your character does things generally according to plan here, you would move on into scene 2, and there's opportunities in scene 2 for tasks and gathering some more information and digging up that information, and then think about, okay, what's next? And then you can kind of play your character through this. How would they change the events? How would they change the dialogue? How would they change some of the things that are happening? This is places where you can really lean into the yes/no probability matrix to say, oh, well, would my character be likely to do this, right? So, like, for example, scene 3, the mysterious power signature, it says, if the crew investigates the location of the unidentified power signature on the planet's surface, the away team materializes in a barren desert. Well, that if, right, I mean, that's an obvious place to trigger the yes/no probability matrix, right? If you've worked through the first 2 scenes and your character is at a certain point in this adventure, and there's a decision point. Are they going to investigate the location of the power signature? Yes, no. Is it highly probable they would do it? Is it somewhat probable? Is it highly unlikely? Like, whatever on that spectrum that you think your character would do, this is the place to roll it. So yes/no probability matrix, roll it here. That'll trigger your next step. Do they continue on through this piece of the adventure? Do you have to adapt it to fit what the die result was, etc.? And then you can continue to follow the adventure as guideposts or as inspiration. You can see there are stat blocks in here for NPCs, so those can be useful if you end up getting into into combat or into some sort of conflict or something. You probably don't need a lot of this because, again, in Captain's Log we've streamlined it so that your opposition doesn't normally roll dice, right? So you can just get a little bit of finesse into here and just focus on the narrative, focus on what your characters are doing. Again, so we get through that scenario, or not scenario, but we get through that scene, get to the resolution there. So we're resolving the encounter. Does the player attempt to do something? That's again yes/no probability matrix. Did they survive the conflict? Yes, no. Then was the resolution. You can see once the encounter has been resolved, either through combat or through the Starfleet crew rescuing the trapped character, the creatures will begin to do some stuff, and that just continues the story. And again, this is places where all of this information is subject to change based on what your character is doing, based on how the dice are falling, and based on how you are bringing your own unique spin into it, along with any information that you're gleaning from the probability matrices that you're using to add even more detail and add more color to this adventure. So you're taking this kind of super well detailed outline for the purposes of Captain's Log, even though it's a standalone adventure complete unto itself, minus the players that you need to drop into it. You can add even more detail to this adventure just by using the probability matrices built into Captain's Log. You can just add all kinds of detail into here. There's a lot of information in here about the Upterans, which in this adventure was the species that you're encountering. There's quite a lot of detail in here, but you could possibly go into the probability matrices in Captain's Log about the culture and society and religion and all that stuff, and maybe there's places in here to start adding in a few more details. What's important to them? What's the Federation? What do they have that the Federation might want if it's not already covered in all this text, right? A lot of great text here. So again, take this stuff at face value, or use it as inspiration and start changing it as needed to fit your needs. We head on into Season 4 here. More things continue to happen. Player characters in the chamber risk getting caught in the stampede as the creatures migrate upwards. So again, there's places in here. There's a lot of if-thens in here. As with a lot of adventures, again, we're trying to provide a toolkit and trying to make sure that the players have options, as opposed to feeling like they're on the tracks and they're going to the end of the adventure without a lot of agency, right? So, Captain's Log characters have an incredible amount of agency, or should anyway, because it's you writing the story and you creating the circumstances and situations, and then letting the dice fall where they may. So anyway, you just work your way through scene by scene, and as you complete these scenes, either successfully or unsuccessfully, you're using your mission tracker, checking off the scenes. There might, as you work your way through the adventure, you might find places that maybe there are scenes that just can be written out because you've made choices, or your character's made choices, or your character has made dice rolls that kind of force choices upon you to go in a slightly different direction. Maybe some of these scenes just end up not being necessary, or maybe some of the scenes just end up being moved to a different part of the story. Maybe Act 1, Scene 5 becomes Act 2, Scene 2 or something. I don't know. That's the great thing about modules or adventures, and the very narrative flow of Captain's Log, is that once you get into like your outlining and you're building the story and you're pulling in all the details, you can shift stuff around to make it fit better narratively. In fact, if you play through your episode for a while, like maybe you get 5 to 6 scenes into it, as you're working through it and you're starting to see the path for what's coming next, maybe you'll realize, oh, you know what, Scene 3 probably would have made more sense if it was Scene 2, or maybe this piece of this little scene should have fit over here later. So you can structure that around and move it around, almost as if you were a writer writing the episode, and you're drafting it and you have an opportunity to cut and paste and move stuff around. I mean, ultimately no one's going to know you did that unless you tell them. So if you were to compile your adventure and put it up for everybody to enjoy, no one's going to know that you moved scenes around unless you tell them. So do whatever you need to do to make the narrative work for you and make it an enjoyable experience. So if that means moving scenes around, do it. If it means running them in order, do that too. You have the flexibility to do that. All right, anyway, so enough said about that. So so we're working through the scenes. So Act 1 had 5 scenes. Now we're getting into Act 2, the language barrier. Got a supplemental Captain's Log here, just like we recommend in Captain's Log, to work through some scenes and some encounters, and then regularly drop in supplemental Captain's Log, or character logs, whatever. You may not be playing a captain, you may be playing a completely different character, which is totally cool. But you can see here, the adventure is giving you a little bit of structure around what's been happening, what could happen in each scene and each act, and then it gives you the deeper level of detail, even beyond like what the mission prompts do in Captain's Log. If you got the supplemental PDF that we included as bonus content with the download package, you'll see those mission prompts really add a 1.5 pages to 2 pages of detail on a particular mission. Gives you a little bit more meat to play with. The mission prompts are kind of like in between a mission brief and a standalone adventure, right? To some extent, but it's all it's all story information that it's all story data that you can use to have fun with. Anyway, so we're in Act 2 now. So language barrier. There's a bit of a mystery. So again, if you think about the classic really simplified story structure. Act 1, get your character up into a tree. Act 2, throw rocks at them. Throw rocks at them, throw rocks at them, throw rocks at them. Make things harder, make things harder, make things harder. Add despair, add drama, add try-fail sequences if you're into fiction writing or screenwriting. The more try-fail sequences you add to somebody, the longer the story it gets, and the more detail you can add to it. A try-fail sequence being you give the character an opportunity to try something. If they fail it, they go on to the next thing. They try that. Maybe they fail it. They try another thing. Maybe they succeed once, and then they fail. And so you just string those along for a while, building the story, building the stakes, building the circumstances, and then eventually that gets you to Act 3, where you start working through the climax, and then the denouement, and the coda, and whatever else you need to do. But anyway, so for the purposes of this story, though, so we're into Act 2, Scene 1. We need to program the universal translator. Okay, well, that sounds like a great task for a character to attempt. Maybe with advantage, maybe spending some momentum, or spending momentum, period. There is no some momentum in Captain's Log. You either have it or you don't. Or you're dealing with threat, maybe. But there's some options here. You can see there's failure consequences here. There's a task recommendation on what task to roll. So you can use all that. You can just fold all that right into your story, right into your narrative, and save yourself a little time from having to roll on the probability matrices. But at the same time, you can lean into those probability matrices to help you get through some of the story elements, especially obtaining information. And in a lot of places in the adventure here, where if it says something like, if the characters do this, consider this. If the characters don't do this, consider this. Well, anytime that you see an if in here, that's a great place to be thinking about the yes/no probability matrix and rolling on that to add a little bit of uncertainty. Even especially given that you're reading the whole thing in front of you, you could get a sense of like where the story should be going. But you can add that level of uncertainty through the probability matrices, especially the yes/no probability matrix, to go from there. So anyway, again, Scene 2, Scene 3, we're just working through here. We've got another potential encounter. And again, encounters are an opportunity to have combat, but if you are like a lot of other Star Trek Adventures players or Captain's Log players, they somehow, like a lot of the groups I've run with Star Trek Adventures, and even in homebrew systems and other Star Trek games, players tend to find a way, at least in my experience, players tend to find a way to find the diplomatic solution and avoid combat, which is great most of the time. But like when you're playtesting a rule set, you want them to get into combat so that you can test the combat rules, and sometimes it doesn't always work because they want to take the Federation high road and try to avoid the combat. So it's a little tricky sometimes to get them to do the easy solution. Not to say combat's easy, but sometimes pulling the phaser and blazing away is easier than getting into the hard negotiation and diplomacy and stuff. So anyway, so we're into Act 2 now. So there's an encounter, there's a potential resolution, and look, that resolution starts right off. If you work through this encounter and you're not quite sure how it should resolve or how it might resolve, or how your character might be involved in resolving it, that is where you can lean into that yes/no probability matrix and into some of the other probability matrices in Captain's Log. Add those results to this storyline, add them to this rough text here, add more texture, add more details, add your character's own unique voice and spin, and your character's values and focuses, right? So your character has values, and there's also the directive built into this mission. So if things are happening in that encounter, and your character needs to lean into their values for some reason, that's absolutely going to color how this whole thing comes out. And then you'll take these tools and adapt them as needed to what's happening in your story. So again, this is all laid out in here. But again, all this content that's laid out in this adventure is really like your first draft material that you can use to really build into your story, and then adapt it and change it. And then we get into Act 3, and now we're heading toward the denouement, the big climax. You got another supplemental log right here that you can use or adapt, or just use as inspiration, or cut and paste it and then revise it to your character's voice as needed, whatever. You got your standoff with a key character here. You got some dialogue or you got some explanatory text that the GM would read out to the players. But in your case, you could just lift that right into your story, adapt it, modify it as needed, or just use it as inspiration. You got some game master guidance here, so you should give that some thought, because that might be more information that you can fold into your story if you want to. Like we're talking about the prime directive here. How does the crew decide to respond to the demands of this non-player character? How would your character respond? That's where you lean into your values, into your focuses, and then maybe even you lean into the probability matrix. Maybe you as a player are genuinely not sure how your character would react to the demands of this non-player character, right? And that's where you can let go and trust in the game and trust in your character and just be willing to roll those dice and see what happens, right? If you genuinely get to a story point, you're like, maybe I know how I would respond to this as, Jim or, whoever you are, but you're not your character, right? So how would your character respond to this? They have a different lifetime of experiences and expectations and so forth. So maybe that's where you lean into the dice and you're like, oh, you know what? I'm going to let fate decide here to some extent, or lean into my character. Maybe whereas if it's like a really risky proposition and you as a player maybe you're more risk averse, and maybe you attempting to do something would be, not very probable compared to your character, who's maybe bold, maybe has the bold talent, or some other talent, or just some nature about them that makes them more daring. Maybe daring is high on their attribute list, right? Maybe their choice to do something would be highly probable or somewhat probable, maybe different than where you would be, and that gives you the opportunity to take a situation that's built into the episode here, and then roll on that matrix to see, okay, my character would probably do something like this, and then you roll, and it's like, yep, sure enough, he or she did, or they did, or no, they didn't, and then you change the circumstances of the story that's written in here, and go from there. Again, moving on, the NPCs have stats. You probably don't really need the stats for the purposes of Captain's Log, but they're here. And what's great about the statistics and the special rules and the attacks, just all the stuff that's built into here, is that you can use all this stuff as story material, right? If it's clear, like this character, Captain Caladoc, they got a couple of values: tough but fair. The collection on Terra 4 must proceed. They got some special rules. They got some attacks. Interestingly, they don't have any focuses. So this is one of the first adventures we did, and I wonder if we just whiffed on that. That was 7 years ago. So it's a little, I don't want to say it's embarrassing, but it's just interesting to look back on these older adventures and see what's there or what's not there. So anyway, but again, all this stuff, all these stat blocks for non-player characters and non-player character ships and creatures, absolutely, there's tons of story potential just built into these, and maybe a future episode I'll unpack that a little bit, just to say here's all the cool stuff that you can do with these different special rules and attacks, and even just their values of attributes and disciplines, if you want to drop that in there as well. So negotiating with the captain, this is a scene or an encounter, social conflict here. You can totally play with that and lean into the probability matrices to add more details here. Like maybe I haven't read this in a while, but maybe Caladoc is not super well laid out in terms of like what their it's her. Okay, so what her perspective is, what her attitude is, etc. That's more detail that you can add from the probability matrices. Oh, and in fact, look at that. Fred did a great job. He added some notes in here about role-playing Captain Caladoc, right? So here's all you need to know about Caladoc. Assume you don't want to add even more texture from the Captain's Log probability matrices. So you can add even more depth and nuance to Caladoc, and maybe by the end of the episode, maybe she becomes a recurring character that you can bring into a future Captain's Log story with your character. Who knows? But yeah, you can see there's some role-playing advice in here, and that's great because that's fleshing out this character even further. And when you're telling a story, like the more fleshed out your characters are, the more real they're going to seem to the reader. And you can add in more details like sight. What do they look like? What do they smell like? What do they feel like? You know, pick an actor that might play Caladoc. You know, if you have a particular vision in mind based on what you've read here and what your own imagination is coming up with, you can drop that in as well. We got to go through that. We got another encounter with the Cavians, potential for ship-to-ship combat, and that's laid out in Captain's Log as well. If you want to have a ship-to-ship combat, there's a stat block for the alien ship that you can use as inspiration. You certainly don't need the attacks or anything, or the challenge dice values, but you can certainly use all this as inspiration to fold into your story. Like you can see, this weapon is really powerful, right? It does 10 challenge dice of damage when it hits, and oh, we forgot to close the parentheses on that. Dang it! It's always fun to look back on stuff that you edited years and years and years ago, and the little typos just pop out at you. You know, for all the thousands and thousands of corrections that we make to these things, we still find errors. That's just the nature of the beast. And no matter how many people I have proofread and edit and review and check it, and no matter how many times I check it, those little gremlins still find a way to sneak in. So I yield to your persistence. Closing parentheses line. You survived 7 years, so good for you. Anyway, so stat blocks, you can use those as needed to color in your narrative. We got a planet encounter on the planet's surface. We got a map, more NPCs, so another potential encounter that you can play through using the rules in Captain's Log, or talk your way out of it. Right, your character maybe finds a way to circumnavigate this encounter and get to the happy ending or whatever. So that's something to play with. Again, more stuff. There's a shielded core facility, so we're getting to another scene here. And then we get to the conclusion. So theoretically, as you're chipping away at these different scenes and encounters, you're finishing them. You're either successfully finishing them, or unsuccessfully, or you're just getting through them, or maybe you're bypassing them. Whatever the case may be, you're working your way through your mission tracker, right? You're the set of deltas. You just check them off as you go, as you move toward the conclusion. So it looks like, Act 3 has 2 scenes, a couple encounters. Then we get to the conclusion. This is probably a long scene, or maybe even a couple scenes, just depending on how things have played out with your character. And then all of our standalone adventures also include a short section called Continuing Voyages, and that's just us and the writers giving you more tools and more ideas to say, hey, you've just played through this standalone adventure. How might you continue this story? Here are some ideas on how you might continue the story, assuming, things happen generally according to the way it was laid out. But by the time you get here, I guarantee by the time you get to this conclusion with your character, through Captain's Log, with all the different choices that you've made, and all the probability matrices having influenced it, and all the extra detail that you've added by virtue of the probability matrices, and you're just your own imagination, these Continuing Voyages ideas may no longer be relevant, or you might even find more to build into here, right? You could probably unpack every single one of these sentences and find whole new stories that you can branch off of after this one, going into your next part of your campaign or something. So again, most of our standalone adventures are 12 to 20 pages long, give or take, including stat blocks and layout and design fripperies and all that stuff. But still, there's probably, I think most of our adventures are between the 8,000 to 10,000 word range. Some are a little longer, some are a little shorter. But that's a lot of meat. that's a lot of story meat for you to start chewing up. And I just killed the metaphor. It's a lot of story material that you can use as needed to fold into your narrative and to build your narrative, right? So this is where are we at here? We're at 33 minutes, so this is probably a good place to stop. I think I've covered everything I need to cover here. Any questions on this, drop them into the comments section by all means. Again, I didn't want to spoil this adventure too much, although if you're really focusing on the screen, you'll probably see the storyline the way it played out. This is just one example of using a published standalone adventure for Star Trek Adventures. We have well over 100 of these now in various products, either in digital format or print format. Of course, everything we do is available digitally as well as print. All the digital only stuff is only digital, of course, but we have a lot of digital stuff on the web stores and Drive-Thru RPG. So like if you're looking for more material, The standalone adventures are pretty inexpensive. There's 2 compilations. These are the Voyages and Strange New Worlds. Strange New Worlds predating the series title. I mean, shockingly, we're all working from the same core material, right? So I was not surprised that they named the series Strange New Worlds. I was a little annoyed that they named the series Strange New Worlds, just given the fact that we got that book out. But I mean, even then, I was, I'm a 3-time story place winner in the Strange New Worlds contest that happened, 15 years ago, something like that. Anyway, so lots of adventures out there for you to use if you want to. A lot of pre-made adventures, a lot of pre-made mini campaigns, and a lot of our books. So all that stuff can be used in Captain's Log. Just drop right into your story, adapt it as needed, revise it, fix it, and then start adding details from all those different probability matrices, and then from your own superpowered matrix, probability matrix in your head. That incredible imagination that you've been gifted with, and it's in there. And these tools will help pull it out and help your story flow and be amazing and be special and be your own unique story in the Star Trek universe. I can't wait to read it. So anyway, this has been Biological Clock. Thank you, Fred Love, for writing this those many years ago. Thank you for the suggestion on using Biological Clock in specific. I hope this was useful. Again, any comments, drop them down below. I'll do my best to get to them. Like and subscribe if you want to. Thank you so much for your support of the game. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you have fun. And I will talk to you next time. Thanks so much.